The golden age of piracy promised freedom, treasure, and adventure on the high seas, but beneath the romanticized tales of rum-soaked revelry lay a world governed by brutal codes and unimaginable cruelty. When we think of pirates today, we often picture swashbuckling heroes or comedic figures, but the reality was far more sinister than Hollywood could ever portray. The very men who rejected the laws of civilization created their own system of justice, one that was often more savage than anything found in the courts of Europe. Life aboard a pirate ship was a constant dance with death, where loyalty was maintained through fear and discipline was enforced through methods so horrifying they would make seasoned executioners recoil. These weren't random acts of violence, but calculated punishments designed to maintain order among the most desperate and dangerous men on Earth. The pirate codes that governed these floating societies were written in blood, and their enforcement left scars that extended far beyond the individual victims. From the sun-bleached bones hanging in gibbet cages to the screams echoing beneath ship hulls during keelhauling, pirate justice was swift, public, and designed to send a message that would echo across every port and vessel in the Caribbean. The methods they employed were not mere folklore. They were documented realities that shaped maritime law and left lasting impressions on naval history. These punishments served multiple purposes. They maintained discipline, deterred mutiny, and created a psychological atmosphere where captains could control crews of hardened criminals. The most terrifying aspect of pirate executions wasn't just their physical brutality, but their psychological precision. Every method was designed to maximize suffering while serving as a public spectacle that would be remembered and retold. Whether it was the slow agony of marooning or the ritualistic humiliation of walking the plank, these punishments were carefully crafted to break both body and spirit. The pirates understood that in a world without formal law enforcement, fear was their most powerful tool for maintaining order. What makes these historical accounts even more chilling is their meticulous documentation. Shiplogs, court records, and survivor testimonies provide us with detailed accounts of these brutal practices, removing any doubt about their authenticity. Maritime historians have uncovered evidence showing that these weren't isolated incidents, but systematic methods of control used across the pirate community. The consistency of these practices across different crews and regions reveals a shared understanding among pirates about the necessity of extreme measures. The legacy of pirate justice extends beyond mere historical curiosity. It influenced the development of maritime law and military discipline for centuries to come. Naval forces around the world adopted and adapted some of these methods, recognizing their effectiveness in maintaining order at sea. The psychological impact of these punishments created a culture of compliance that helped establish the rigid hierarchy necessary for survival in the harsh maritime environment of the 18th century. Perhaps most disturbing of all is how these brutal methods became normalized within pirate society. Men who had fled civilization's laws created something far worse, a system where mercy was seen as weakness and brutality was considered necessity. The psychological conditioning required to participate in or witness these executions transformed ordinary sailors into instruments of terror, showing how quickly human beings can adapt to extreme circumstances when survival depends on conformity to violent norms. Today, as we examine these historical accounts, we're forced to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the thin line between civilization and barbarism. The pirates' methods of execution and punishment weren't products of inherent evil, but rather desperate attempts to create order in a chaotic world where traditional authority had no power. Understanding these practices helps us appreciate both the brutality of maritime life and the incredible resilience of those who survived in such an unforgiving environment. Historical context and origins. The emergence of pirate punishment systems can be traced back to the unique circumstances of 17th and 18th century maritime society, where traditional legal systems held no sway over the vast expanse of ocean. Pirates operated in a lawless vacuum, creating their own brutal codes out of necessity rather than sadism. These men came from diverse backgrounds: former naval officers, escaped slaves, displaced farmers, and career criminals, all united by their rejection of conventional society and their desperate need for survival on the high seas. The Caribbean during this period was a powder keg of competing colonial powers, where Spanish treasure fleets, English merchants, and French privateers all vied for control of lucrative trade routes. Into this chaos stepped the pirates, who initially served as unofficial auxiliaries to various governments through letters of marque, but eventually broke free to become independent operators. Without the backing of any nation, they had to create their own systems of governance, and these systems reflected the harsh realities of their existence. Pirate crews were essentially floating societies composed of some of the most desperate and dangerous men of their era. Many were former military personnel who had grown accustomed to strict discipline and harsh punishments during their service in royal navies. Others were escaped convicts or indentured servants who had experienced brutality firsthand and understood its effectiveness as a tool of control. This background meant that extreme punishments weren't shocking aberrations, but natural extensions of what these men already knew. The development of pirate codes wasn't an intellectual exercise, but a practical necessity born from the need to maintain order among men who had already rejected conventional authority. These codes had to be severe enough to deter mutiny and theft, while being flexible enough to allow for the democratic decision-making that many pirate crews employed. The punishments they devised were therefore carefully calibrated to serve multiple functions: deterrence, punishment, and public demonstration of the captain's authority. Maritime conditions themselves contributed to the severity of pirate justice. On a ship, there was no possibility of imprisonment, no way to banish someone temporarily, and limited resources to waste on lengthy procedures. Punishments had to be immediate, decisive, and memorable. The confined space of a ship meant that every crew member would witness these punishments, ensuring maximum psychological impact and serving as constant reminders of the consequences of disobedience. The influence of various cultural traditions also shaped pirate punishment practices. Many pirates had served on ships from different nations, each with its own military traditions and disciplinary methods. Spanish sailors brought knowledge of Inquisition techniques. British naval personnel contributed their experience with flogging and keelhauling, and former slaves added their understanding of psychological domination. This cultural mixing pot created a unique blend of punishment methods that was more comprehensive and brutal than any single tradition. Economic factors played a crucial role in shaping these practices as well. Pirates operated on razor-thin margins of survival, where the loss of a single crew member could mean the difference between successful raids and disaster. Punishments had to serve not just as deterrents, but as ways to maintain crew effectiveness. Methods like marooning conserved ship resources while still delivering harsh justice, while others like gibbetting provided long-term psychological benefits that extended beyond the immediate crew. The religious and superstitious beliefs prevalent among sailors of the era also influenced punishment practices. Many pirates believed that certain crimes brought bad luck to the entire ship, requiring extreme measures to appease supernatural forces. This added a ritualistic element to many executions, where the punishment became not just about maintaining discipline, but about protecting the crew from divine retribution. These beliefs gave even the most brutal punishments a sense of necessity and righteousness that helped crews justify their participation. Keel hauling stands as perhaps the most ingeniously cruel punishment ever devised for maritime discipline, combining the terror of near drowning with the agony of being dragged across a surface designed to strip flesh from bone. This practice involved tying a rope around the victim's waist and dragging them underneath the ship from one side to the other, forcing them to scrape against the barnacle-encrusted hull while fighting for breath in the churning water below. The preparation for keel hauling was itself a form of psychological torture that could last for hours. The condemned man would be stripped naked and forced to watch as crew members prepared the ropes and checked the wind conditions to ensure optimal suffering. Weights were often tied to the victim's feet to prevent them from floating to the surface, while the rope's length was carefully measured to control how deeply they would be dragged. The entire crew would gather on deck to witness the proceedings, creating an atmosphere of terror and anticipation. The physical mechanics of keel hauling were designed to maximize both pain and the chance of survival, a crucial distinction that made this punishment particularly effective as a deterrent. As the victim was thrown overboard, the rope would pull them downward and across the ship's hull, where razor-sharp barnacles and rough wood would tear at their skin. The speed of the drag depended on wind conditions and the captain's whim, with slower speeds increasing the likelihood of drowning, while faster speeds caused more severe lacerations. The barnacles that covered ship hulls were nature's own instruments of torture, acting like thousands of tiny blades that would slice and tear at exposed flesh. These marine organisms grew in thick colonies on wooden hulls, creating a surface so rough that even brief contact could cause serious injuries. As victims were dragged across this biological minefield, their skin would be flayed away in strips, leaving bloody trails in the water that often attracted sharks, adding another layer of terror to an already horrifying experience. Breathing during keel hauling required incredible presence of mind and physical endurance, as victims had to time their inhalations during brief moments when they might break the surface. Many men died not from their injuries but from drowning, as panic and pain made it impossible to coordinate their breathing with the motion of the drag. The salt water that filled their lungs would burn like fire, while the constant submersion and emergence created a disorienting cycle that made survival as much a matter of luck as stamina. The duration of keel hauling varied depending on the severity of the crime and the captain's temperament, but most sessions lasted between 2 and 5 minutes, an eternity for the victim, but carefully timed to avoid certain death. Experienced captains knew exactly how long a man could survive this ordeal, and they used this knowledge to calibrate the punishment's severity. Some victims were dragged multiple times, with brief respites between sessions to allow them to regain consciousness and fully experience their punishment. Survival of keel hauling often resulted in permanent disability, as the combination of lacerations, saltwater poisoning, and near drowning typically left victims with chronic breathing problems, infected wounds, and psychological trauma that lasted for the rest of their lives. The visible scars served as permanent reminders of the punishment, marking survivors as men who had faced the ultimate maritime justice and lived to tell the tale. These scars became part of pirate folklore, with survivors gaining a grudging respect from their peers. The psychological impact of keel hauling extended far beyond the immediate victim, creating a culture of fear that permeated every aspect of ship life. Crew members who witnessed these punishments would carry the memory with them to other ships, spreading tales of the brutality they had seen and reinforcing the reputation of captains who employed such methods. The mere threat of keel hauling was often enough to maintain discipline, as sailors understood that even minor infractions could escalate into this nightmare scenario if they challenged their captain's authority. Marooning, slow death in paradise. Marooning represented the cruelest form of pirate justice, precisely because it offered the illusion of mercy while delivering a fate worse than immediate execution. This punishment involved abandoning the condemned on a remote, uninhabited island with minimal supplies, typically just a pistol with a single shot and a small amount of fresh water. What appeared to be a second chance at life was actually an elaborate form of psychological torture that could extend suffering for weeks or even months. The selection of marooning locations was a calculated decision that revealed the sophisticated cruelty behind this punishment. Pirates chose islands that were visible from shipping lanes but too small or remote to attract regular visitors. These locations offered just enough resources to sustain life temporarily, creating false hope while ensuring eventual death. The condemned could see potential rescue ships in the distance, but had no way to signal them effectively, adding psychological torture to their physical suffering. The supplies provided to marooned victims followed a twisted logic that maximized despair while maintaining the pretense of fairness. The single pistol shot was understood by all involved to be intended for suicide when starvation became unbearable, turning the weapon into both a mercy and a torment. The small water ration, usually just a day's supply, forced immediate rationing decisions that would dominate every moment of the victim's remaining life. Some captains would add a Bible to the supplies, adding mockery to an already cruel punishment. The psychological progression of marooning followed a predictable pattern that pirates understood well, making it an effective deterrent for potential troublemakers. Initial hope would give way to mounting desperation as the victim realized the inadequacy of their supplies and the remoteness of their location. The constant decision-making required for survival, how much water to drink, where to seek shelter, when to use the precious bullet, created mental anguish that was often worse than the physical suffering of hunger and thirst. Environmental factors played a crucial role in determining how long marooned victims would survive, and pirates became expert at predicting these variables. Islands in the Caribbean could provide coconuts and rainwater, potentially extending life for weeks, while rocky outcrops in other regions offered no such resources. Weather patterns, seasonal variations, and the presence of dangerous wildlife all factored into the victim's chances of survival, making each marooning a unique form of customized torture. The social isolation of marooning was perhaps its most devastating aspect, as humans are fundamentally social creatures who require interaction for psychological stability. Condemned pirates found themselves completely cut off from human contact, with only their own thoughts for company. This isolation often led to madness long before starvation claimed their lives, with survivors of rescue reporting conversations with imaginary companions and elaborate delusions about rescue ships that existed only in their minds. Some victims of marooning did survive through exceptional resourcefulness or pure luck, and their accounts provide harrowing insights into this brutal punishment. Alexander Selkirk, the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe, survived 4 years on a deserted island but reported severe psychological trauma that persisted long after his rescue. These rare survival stories were well known among pirates and actually enhanced the punishment's effectiveness by demonstrating that survival was theoretically possible while remaining practically unlikely. The aftermath of failed maroonings, when victims were eventually rescued, often produced pirates who were either completely broken or hardened beyond recognition. Those who survived typically displayed extreme loyalty to whoever rescued them, having learned firsthand the consequences of opposing pirate authority. Others became completely unhinged, their minds shattered by months of isolation and desperation. Either outcome served the pirates' purposes, as both responses demonstrated the power of their justice system to transform human beings into cautionary tales. The psychology of walking the plank. Contrary to popular belief, walking the plank was rarely used by historical pirates, but when it did occur, it represented one of the most psychologically sophisticated forms of execution ever devised. This method forced victims to participate actively in their own deaths, creating a level of mental anguish that went far beyond simple murder. The condemned man had to make the conscious decision to step off the plank, transforming execution into a form of coerced suicide that left lasting impressions on all who witnessed it. The ritualistic nature of walking the plank was carefully designed to maximize psychological impact on both the victim and the watching crew. The plank itself was typically a piece of lumber extended over the ship's side, long enough to prevent the victim from jumping back aboard, but short enough to ensure they couldn't reach the water safely. Crew members would gather around in a ceremonial circle, creating an arena atmosphere that turned the execution into a public spectacle that would be remembered and retold for years to come. The time factor in plank-walking executions was crucial to their psychological effectiveness, as victims were given time to contemplate their fate while being forced to take active steps toward their own death. Unlike other forms of execution that happened quickly, walking the plank required the condemned to overcome their survival instincts repeatedly. First to step onto the plank, then to continue walking despite knowing each step brought them closer to death. This internal struggle was visible to all observers, creating a powerful deterrent effect. The choice offered to plank-walking victims was illusory, but psychologically devastating, as they could technically refuse to walk and accept whatever alternative punishment the captain might devise. However, these alternatives were typically described in such horrific terms that the plank began to seem like mercy. This false choice created additional mental anguish, as victims had to weigh their options while under extreme duress, often leading to complete psychological breakdown before the execution even began. Physical factors enhanced the psychological terror of plank walking, as victims had to confront not just their impending death, but the specific nature of drowning. The sight of sharks circling below, either naturally occurring or attracted by bait thrown overboard, added visceral terror to abstract mortality. The height above the water, the roughness of the seas, and the presence of dangerous marine life all contributed to a uniquely terrifying death that engaged every fear center in the human brain simultaneously. The social dynamics of plank walking created additional layers of psychological manipulation, as victims were often forced to address the crew or make final statements before their execution. This requirement to speak coherently while facing imminent death often resulted in breakdowns that were as entertaining to bloodthirsty crews as they were educational. Some victims used these final moments to curse their captors, while others begged for mercy, and both responses served the pirates' purposes by demonstrating the absolute power they held over life and death. Variations in plank-walking procedures revealed the sophisticated understanding pirates had of human psychology and their ability to customize punishments for maximum effect. Some captains would have victims blindfolded to prevent them from timing their fall, while others would remove the blindfold at the last moment to force them to see their fate. The plank might be greased to make walking more difficult, or weights might be attached to ensure the victim sank quickly, depending on the captain's desire for prolonged suffering versus immediate death. The rarity of plank walking in historical records actually enhanced its psychological power, as the uncertainty about when and how it might be employed created constant anxiety among pirate crews. Unlike keelhauling or marooning, which had established procedures, walking the plank retained an element of unpredictability that made it more terrifying than more commonly used punishments. This unpredictability served the pirates' purposes by keeping crew members off balance and unable to prepare mentally for potential punishment. Gibbetting represented the pirates' understanding that death itself was not always sufficient punishment. Sometimes the message required a corpse that could continue serving their purposes long after the victim had died. This practice involved displaying executed pirates in iron cages or chains at prominent locations where their decomposing bodies would serve as permanent warnings to anyone considering a life of piracy. The gibbet cage became a symbol of ultimate defeat, transforming the victim's remains into a public service announcement written in rotting flesh and bleached bone. The construction of gibbet cages was a specialized craft that revealed the technical sophistication behind this brutal practice. These iron frameworks were custom-built to fit the victim's body dimensions, designed to hold a corpse securely while allowing for natural decomposition and air circulation. The cages were typically made from thick iron bars, welded or riveted together, with openings large enough to allow carrion birds access to the body while preventing the remains from falling out and ruining the display. Location selection for gibbets followed strategic principles that maximized their psychological impact on the maritime community. Popular sites included harbor entrances, lighthouse points, and other prominent coastal features that would be visible to incoming ships from considerable distances. Port Royal in Jamaica featured a gibbet point where dozens of pirate corpses were displayed simultaneously, creating a grotesque forest of iron cages that served as the first sight greeting visitors to one of the Caribbean's most important ports. The process of gibbeting began while the victim was still alive, adding another layer of terror to an already brutal punishment. Condemned pirates would be forced to watch as their custom cage was constructed and installed, giving them time to contemplate their fate while seeing the physical reality of their coming torment. Some were executed before being placed in the gibbet, while others were left to die of exposure and starvation while trapped in their iron prisons, depending on the severity of their crimes and the captain's temperament. The decomposition process visible in gibbet displays created a timeline of decay that served different psychological purposes as time progressed. Fresh corpses generated immediate horror and disgust, while partially decomposed bodies showed the reality of death in graphic detail. Eventually, sun-bleached skeletons provided a more abstract but equally powerful reminder of mortality that could persist for years. Each stage of decay sent a different message to observers, maintaining the effectiveness of the display long after the initial execution. Weather and environmental factors played crucial roles in the gibbet's effectiveness as both punishment and deterrent. Tropical climates accelerated decomposition, creating intense odors that could be detected from considerable distances, while also attracting clouds of insects and carrion birds that added to the horrific spectacle. Seasonal storms might damage displays or scatter remains, requiring maintenance and occasional replacement of both cages and contents to maintain the desired psychological impact. The social impact of gibbet displays extended far beyond their immediate deterrent effect on potential pirates, influencing entire maritime communities and shaping public attitudes toward piracy. Merchant sailors, naval officers, and civilian passengers all encountered these displays during their travels, carrying stories of what they had seen to ports around the world. This word-of-mouth distribution system amplified the gibbet's psychological reach far beyond its physical location, making it one of the most cost-effective forms of long-term deterrence available to authorities. Documentation from the period reveals that gibbet displays were often accompanied by placards or signs identifying the victim and their crimes, turning the remains into educational exhibits that provided specific lessons about the consequences of particular actions. These displays created a form of public education that was far more memorable and impactful than any written law or posted regulation. The combination of visual horror and specific information about the victim's crimes created lasting impressions that influenced behavior for generations of sailors and potential pirates. Documented cases and historical accounts. The case of Captain Charles Vane provides one of the most well-documented examples of pirate justice in action, illustrating how these brutal practices were applied even to high-ranking pirates who fell from grace. Vane, once a powerful captain in the Caribbean, was eventually captured and faced trial in Jamaica in 1721. Historical records from the proceedings reveal how his own former crew members testified about the punishments he had administered, including detailed accounts of keelhaulings and maroonings that he had ordered during his years of piracy. Edward Lowe, known as one of the most sadistic pirates of the Golden Age, left behind a trail of documented brutality that helps us understand the systematic nature of pirate punishment. Court records and survivor testimonies describe his use of torture methods that went beyond even the brutal standards of his contemporaries. In one documented case from 1722, Lowe ordered a merchant captain's lips to be cut off and cooked, then forced the man to eat them before killing him. These accounts, recorded in both colonial court proceedings and survivor testimonies, demonstrate how individual pirates could escalate beyond even the established codes of their profession. The trial records of Black Bart's crew, captured after Bartholomew Roberts' death in 1722, provide unprecedented insight into the internal workings of pirate justice systems. Over 150 pirates were tried in Cape Coast Castle, and their testimonies revealed the complex codes that governed their ship. The records describe specific punishments for different offenses. Desertion resulted in marooning, striking another crew member led to keelhauling, and theft from the common fund warranted death. These legal documents preserve detailed accounts of how these punishments were carried out and who was responsible for their administration. The diary of colonial official William Byrd II contains graphic descriptions of gibbet displays he encountered during his travels through the Caribbean in the early 18th century. His writings provide contemporary accounts of the physical reality of these displays, including details about the smell, the sounds made by wind passing through the cages, and the psychological impact on local populations. Byrd's observations as an educated outsider give us valuable perspective on how these practices appeared to those not directly involved in pirate culture. Spanish colonial records from Cartagena document the interrogation of surviving pirates captured during raids on Spanish treasure fleets, providing insights into punishment practices from the victim's perspective. These documents, preserved in the Archive of the Indies in Seville, include testimonies from pirates who described witnessing keel hailings, maroonings, and other punishments aboard various ships. The Spanish authorities were particularly interested in understanding pirate organization and discipline, leading to detailed questioning about punishment practices that might otherwise have gone unrecorded. The memoirs of Alexander Exquemelin, a former pirate turned chronicler, provide first-hand accounts of punishments he witnessed during his time with Henry Morgan's forces. His book, The Buccaneers of America, published in 1678, includes detailed descriptions of torture methods and executions that he personally observed. Exquemelin's accounts are particularly valuable because they come from someone who participated in pirate society rather than observing it from outside, giving us insights into how these practices were perceived by those who lived under their threat daily. Naval records from HMS ships pursuing pirates contain official reports of gibbet displays encountered during patrols, providing military perspectives on these punishment practices. Captain Woodes Rogers, the governor of the Bahamas, who led efforts to suppress piracy in the region, wrote extensively about the psychological warfare aspects of these displays and their effectiveness in deterring recruitment to pirate crews. His correspondence with the Admiralty reveals how authorities understood and attempted to counter the pirates' use of terror as a tool of social control. The testimony of rescued victims provides some of the most harrowing accounts of pirate punishment practices, preserved in court records from piracy trials throughout the early 18th century. These accounts describe not just the physical aspects of various punishments, but their psychological effects on both victims and witnesses. One particularly detailed account from a merchant sailor who survived keel hauling describes the long-term effects of his injuries and the psychological trauma that persisted years after his rescue, providing insight into the lasting impact of these brutal practices on those who survived them. The broader impact on maritime society. The influence of pirate punishment practices extended far beyond the confines of pirate ships, fundamentally shaping the development of naval discipline and maritime law throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Naval commanders, having witnessed the effectiveness of pirate methods in maintaining order among unruly crews, adapted many of these practices for use in legitimate naval forces. The British Royal Navy, in particular, incorporated modified versions of keelhauling and other pirate punishments into their official disciplinary codes, recognizing their psychological impact on maintaining order during long voyages. Colonial authorities throughout the Caribbean and North American coast found themselves dealing with the psychological aftermath of pirate punishment displays, as gibbet cages and other visible reminders of pirate justice influenced entire port communities. Local governments had to balance the deterrent value of these displays against their negative impact on trade and tourism, leading to complex negotiations about where and how long such exhibits should remain visible. The presence of decomposing pirate corpses in harbor approaches created lasting associations between specific locations and maritime violence that persisted long after the pirates themselves were gone. The merchant marine community developed its own response to pirate punishment practices, creating informal networks for sharing information about which crews and captains employed the most brutal methods. This intelligence network helped merchants avoid particularly dangerous pirates, while also spreading knowledge about effective punishment techniques that some merchant captains began adopting for their own crews. The cross-pollination of disciplinary methods between legitimate and illegitimate maritime forces created a culture of accepted brutality that influenced ocean travel for generations. Legal systems throughout the colonial world had to adapt to address the unique challenges posed by pirate punishment practices, particularly regarding the treatment of survivors and witnesses. Courts dealing with piracy cases encountered victims who had been physically and psychologically damaged by their experiences, requiring new approaches to testimony and evidence gathering. The precedents established in these cases influenced the development of maritime law and helped define the boundaries between acceptable military discipline and criminal torture. The psychological impact of pirate punishment practices on maritime communities created lasting cultural changes that affected how people thought about ocean travel and naval service. The vivid stories of keel hauling, marooning, and gibbeting became part of maritime folklore, influencing literature, music, and popular culture in ways that persisted long after piracy itself had been suppressed. These stories served as cautionary tales that helped maintain social order by demonstrating the consequences of challenging established authority structures. Insurance companies and maritime commercial interests had to factor the psychological effects of pirate punishment practices into their risk assessments and business decisions. The knowledge that certain trade routes involved exposure to pirates who employed particularly brutal punishment methods influenced shipping costs, route selection, and crew recruitment practices. This economic impact created additional pressure for authorities to suppress piracy and led to increased investment in naval protection for merchant vessels. The international diplomatic implications of pirate punishment practices created tensions between colonial powers who disagreed about appropriate responses to maritime violence. Some nations advocated for matching pirate brutality with equally harsh official punishments, while others argued for maintaining higher standards of civilized behavior. These debates influenced international maritime law and contributed to the development of treaties governing the treatment of prisoners and the conduct of naval warfare. Religious communities throughout the maritime world struggled to address the moral implications of pirate punishment practices, particularly regarding the treatment of bodies displayed in gibbet cages. The conflict between the deterrent value of these displays and religious beliefs about proper treatment of the dead created ongoing controversies that influenced burial practices and legal procedures for dealing with executed criminals. These religious considerations added another layer of complexity to the already difficult task of suppressing piracy while maintaining moral authority over colonial populations. Modern understanding and historical reassessment. Contemporary historians have developed a more nuanced understanding of pirate punishment practices through the application of modern psychological and sociological research methods. Rather than viewing these brutal methods as simple sadism, scholars now recognize them as sophisticated systems of social control that reflected the unique challenges of maintaining order in stateless maritime societies. This reanalysis has revealed the calculated nature of pirate justice and its effectiveness in creating stable hierarchies among groups of men who had rejected conventional authority structures. Archaeological investigations of former pirate strongholds have uncovered physical evidence that corroborates historical accounts of punishment practices, while also revealing previously unknown details about their implementation. Excavations at sites like Port Royal and Nassau have uncovered gibbet hardware, restraint devices, and other artifacts that provide material evidence for the reality of these brutal practices. These discoveries have helped historians separate fact from folklore, while also demonstrating the systematic nature of pirate punishment systems. Medical analysis of skeletal remains attributed to executed pirates has provided insights into the physical effects of various punishment methods that were previously known only through written accounts. Forensic examination of bones recovered from gibbet sites has revealed evidence of keel-hauling injuries, malnutrition, consistent with marooning, and other physical trauma that confirms historical descriptions, while also adding new details about the physiological impact of these practices. This scientific approach has enhanced our understanding of both the immediate and long-term effects of pirate justice on its victims. Psychological studies of historical accounts have revealed patterns in pirate punishment practices that reflect sophisticated understanding of human behavior and group dynamics. Modern analysis suggests that pirates intuitively understood principles of behavioral conditioning, social psychology, and crowd dynamics that weren't formally recognized by academic psychology until centuries later. This research has highlighted the intelligence behind seemingly random acts of brutality and demonstrated how pirates used terror as a precise tool for social engineering. Comparative studies of punishment practices across different cultures and time periods have placed pirate justice in broader historical context, revealing similarities to disciplinary methods used by various military, religious, and governmental organizations throughout history. This comparative approach has shown that pirate practices, while extreme, were not unique aberrations, but rather part of a continuum of human responses to the challenge of maintaining social order under difficult circumstances. These studies have helped modern readers understand how ordinary people could participate in such brutal systems. The influence of pirate punishment practices on modern military and correctional institutions has been traced through historical analysis of disciplinary codes and training manuals. Many techniques originally developed by pirates were eventually incorporated into official military procedures, where they continued to influence approaches to discipline and punishment well into the 20th century. Understanding this historical connection has provided insights into the persistence of certain forms of institutional violence and the difficulty of reforming organizations that have incorporated brutal practices into their fundamental operations. Educational institutions have struggled with how to present the reality of pirate punishment practices without either sanitizing history or glorifying violence, leading to ongoing debates about appropriate ways to teach this material. Museums, historical sites, and educational programs have developed various approaches to addressing this challenging content, ranging from detailed historical analysis to more general discussions of maritime law enforcement. These educational challenges reflect broader societal questions about how to confront uncomfortable aspects of historical reality. The romanticization of piracy in popular culture has created significant barriers to public understanding of the brutal reality of pirate punishment practices, requiring historians to actively counter misconceptions created by movies, books, and other entertainment media. This effort to separate historical fact from popular fiction has revealed how modern audiences struggle to accept the reality of past brutality, while also highlighting the importance of accurate historical education in understanding human nature and social development. The brutal punishment practices employed by pirates during the golden age of piracy stand as testament to humanity's capacity for both systematic cruelty and adaptive social organization under extreme circumstances. These methods, while horrifying by modern standards, reveal the sophisticated understanding their creators had of human psychology and group dynamics. The pirates' ability to maintain order among some of the most desperate and dangerous men of their era through carefully calibrated applications of terror demonstrates the dark effectiveness of fear as a tool of social control. The historical record of pirate punishment practices serves as a stark reminder that the thin veneer of civilization can quickly disappear when traditional authority structures collapse or become irrelevant. The men who created these brutal codes were not monsters, but ordinary individuals who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances where survival depended on their ability to impose order through whatever means necessary. Their solutions, while extreme, reflected rational responses to the genuine challenges they faced in creating stable societies outside the boundaries of conventional law. The psychological sophistication evident in pirate punishment methods reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature and our understanding of behavioral modification that remain relevant today. The pirates' intuitive grasp of principles that modern psychology has only recently formalized suggests that the capacity for systematic manipulation of human behavior is a fundamental aspect of our species rather than a modern development. This realization has implications for how we understand everything from military discipline to corporate management to criminal justice. The persistence of pirate punishment practices in official military and governmental institutions, long after piracy itself was suppressed, demonstrates how effective techniques for social control tend to survive and adapt, regardless of their origins or moral implications. The incorporation of pirate methods into legitimate naval codes shows how successful innovations in human management transcend the moral boundaries of their creators, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable reality that effectiveness often trumps ethics in institutional decision-making. The romanticization of piracy in popular culture has created a dangerous disconnect between historical reality and public perception that continues to influence how we understand both past and present forms of violence. By sanitizing the brutal reality of pirate society, modern entertainment has made it more difficult for people to recognize and respond appropriately to contemporary forms of systematic cruelty and social control. This educational failure has real consequences for our ability to identify and prevent similar practices in modern contexts. The study of pirate punishment practices provides valuable insights into the conditions that enable ordinary people to participate in extraordinary cruelty, lessons that remain relevant in an era of ongoing conflicts and social upheaval. Understanding how maritime communities adapted to and normalized extreme violence helps us recognize the warning signs of similar developments in contemporary society and provides frameworks for preventing the emergence of new forms of systematic brutality. The archaeological and forensic evidence supporting historical accounts of pirate punishment practices removes any doubt about their reality, while also demonstrating the importance of material evidence in understanding past events. The physical remains of gibbet cages, the skeletal evidence of keel-hauling injuries, and other material traces of pirate justice provide concrete proof that these practices were not merely folklore, but documented historical reality that shaped the lives of thousands of people. Ultimately, The legacy of pirate punishment practices extends far beyond maritime history to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, social organization, and the conditions that enable both civilization and barbarism. By studying these brutal methods with clear eyes and honest assessment, we honor the memory of their victims while also gaining insights that can help prevent similar tragedies in our own time. The pirates' sophisticated understanding of terror as a tool of control serves as both historical lesson and contemporary warning about the dangers that emerge when fear becomes the foundation of social order.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.